Welcome to the Painting Coach, and in this video we're starting with a little bit of a confession. My friends, I have misled you, and I'm so very sorry. You may remember me painting this Rogal Dorn tank a few videos ago using my new Artis Opus dry brushes, which they very kindly sent me, and I was actually really chuffed with how this tank came out, and I'm still chuffed with how this tank came out. Last weekend, I went to the UK Games Expo, and if you came and said hi, thank you so much. It always does mean such a lot. But I got the chance to sit down with Byron from Artis Opus, and he gave me a lesson on how to use the brushes properly. And it's safe to say that I was completely wrong in terms of how I was using them. So in this video, I'm going to take what I learned and try and put it into practice so that I can show you the right way to use those amazing Series Ds. Make sure you watch all of the video, as Artis Opus have very kindly donated a set of Series D brushes that you could win. So I'm going to paint this Generatorum from the new Kill Team Termination set. A huge thanks to Games Workshop for sending that out to me early. And I'm going to be using all of the techniques that I learned off Byron from Artis Opus at UK Games Expo. So let's see how I get on. So first things first, let's get the palette set up. Now you can see I've already been experimenting. I've done one side, so I'm going to show you how to do the other side. So firstly, we're going to get some paint on the palette, and I'm going to start off with Khorne Red. Once I've got a liberal amount of that down, I'm going to set up the damping pad. So to do that, you just dip the back end of your brush into some nice clean water and put a single drop from the back of your brush into that damping pad. Just tap it in with your finger. I'm then going to take some paint from that little bit I've already put on the palette and tap my brush into it, keeping it vertical and just drawing the paint out. So I haven't got a huge amount on my brush, but I've got enough to make a start. I'm then going to rub some off on the palette, and I'm going to go to the model, and I'm going to start stippling this across the model. Now, the frames are going to go in and out of focus as the brush moves, so I do apologize for that, but I will show you the end result as I work through. Now, the other thing you can do as well is you can just tap the brush into that damping pad. Wipe as much off as you can, because that's going to help the paint leave the brush. And you can see here, as I'm stippling, it's starting to come onto the model. And this is how you can control the depth and the shadows. One really important thing with this is that you stipple in a perpendicular position to the model, so you're not accidentally scuffing it or dragging it. So this is very different to what a traditional dry brush would be. It's very much a stippling technique. So I'm just going to work this all over the side of the model, not being overly cautious about bits that are finished or bits that are going to be a different colour later on. So you can see there, this has given me a nice base to run from, and I'm going to start to build this up now, focusing on the top half and then top quarter of this Generatorum. The next colour is Mephiston Red. I do this exactly the same way as I prepped the Khorne Red. So I put a nice bit of paint onto the palette. I prep the damping pad. It's very warm here, so it is drying out. If your damping pad is still wet, you don't need to add more water to it, because that will cause more issues later on. I'm doing the same thing, taking a little bit on the brush. It's the same brush I used. It's not been cleaned. And I'm just dragging it out and making sure I work it into the front end of those bristles. I'm then going to start to go onto the model. And again, I'm stippling it on, focusing on the top half, and just generally adding a little bit more until I'm really happy with what the coverage looks like. And I've got a nice transition from the bottom layer. That's another key part of this. Again, if you need to, you can always tap it on the damping pad to just add a little bit of water, which will help the paint leave the brush. But do make sure you wipe it on the palette first so that you don't flood the model. So I'm really happy with how that Mephiston Red has gone down. Now it's time to start brightening things up and really go for the highlights. So the first colour I'm going to use for that is Evil Sunz Scarlet, which is a nice bright red. Really like this colour. And I'm doing exactly the same thing again. Again, focusing in how I actually apply the paint to the model, making sure I hit that at a 90-degree angle so I'm not accidentally dragging paint. Now, you can see from the model, I'm not being absolutely perfect with this. It's very much aspirational, but I'm really enjoying how quickly this process is going. And actually, it's starting to come up quite nicely. And you've got a very, very obvious transition from dark to light, which will start to tie into the model as we work through the highlights. I'm now going to add a little bit of AK white to the palette, and I'm going to start to draw this out. So I've got a very little bit of white, and I'm going to mix it into that Evil Sunz Scarlet on there. So I'm starting to build a little bit more of a pinky red colour, and this is going to be the start of the highlights. Again, you might need to just tap the damping pad to add a little bit of moisture to the brush to help it leave. And then I'm going to go and start stippling again. Now, the first thing that jumped out at me when I did this was I put too much on, or I had too much paint on my brush. So you can see that it's getting a little bit rough. and a little bit too bright too quick. So all I did was just mix a little bit more of that Evil Sunz Scarlet back in and just stippled over those areas where I put it on a little bit too bright to start with. You may actually like this because this is a really good base if you want to do like something heavily weathered. This is a good way to do that. I'm not going for heavily weathered at the moment, but I might change my mind later on. As I went through the stages, I just added more and more white into that and had less and less paint on my brush. And this is where the pressure you apply starts to come in as well. So whilst I am still stippling, the next stage I'm going to do more of a traditional dry brush just to catch the edges. But just working my way around the model, I'm really liking how this looks. I'm really liking the colour transition. I'm really liking the brightness I'm starting to get. The final stage with the red is to put a very pink mix on. Now, I'm not 100% sure what the ratios are. You can see the colouring on my palette, but it is quite bright. It's kind of a salmon type colour. So what I'm going to do with this is just give this a traditional dry brush to catch all the edges. But I'm not just focusing on the top of the model. I'm focusing on all the edges. And I'm doing this with a very gentle touch. And what you'll start to see is this catches nice and easily, but it also starts to tie those highlights and all that red together. So I'm really quite happy with how this is looking. So that red looks great. I've just based some of the other areas on there as well. So I've painted all the silver areas black just to help me differentiate the colour. I've painted some Rhinox hide on these panels, which are going to be light. I've taken some Stegadon scale green to paint the plasma reactor. First up, we'll do those white panels. So I've masked off the area, quite loosely it must be said. And then I'm going to do the same thing using a slightly smaller brush from the D series, but I'm now using Rakarth Flesh. And what you may also notice is my dampening pad has changed colour. And that's because I realised if I used what I had in there, I would actually be transferring red paint onto the model as well. As luckily I had a spare damping pad, so I've used that. And I'm doing exactly the same thing. And you can see me, I'm just stippling. And I'm very slowly building up the colour. So I haven't got a huge amount of paint on my brush at all. I'm just taking a little bit out, I'm dragging it across, damping my brush. And where it does have too much, I'm wiping most of it off on that textured palette. Again, back to the model and start the stippling. Like I said, the focus isn't fantastic, but you will see the end results and I will talk you through it. So that first layer has come out quite nicely. I'm going to highlight that with some Pallid Witch Flesh next. Again, exactly the same technique, same brush, taking most of it off. There's probably a little bit too much moisture in the brush at this step, so I do just need to tread a little carefully. I'm going to focus on where I think these highlights are going to land. Again, stippling in nice and firmly, and this is turning out quite nicely, and there's not a huge time investment in this. In fact, I probably spent more time masking off than I did actually the painting, but yeah, I'm really happy with how this bright panel looks and adds a nice accent overall. When that's dry completely, the best bit of any masking exercise is actually taking the mask off. And this is a fairly straightforward step, but I did actually cut my finger with a knife doing this. Be careful when using sharp objects. Now that's come out really nicely. I'm really happy with that. A little bit of overspill, but I can cover that with a crisp line highlight later on. So now I've masked off that plasma, which was a wholly altogether more involved process. And we're going to start highlighting all of that generator. So we're starting off with Temple Guard Blue. Now I've gone back to a slightly bigger brush for this because it's a bigger area. So that does mean I have to be a little bit more aggressive when I work it into some of those recesses. But generally I'm looking to cover as much of this plasma section as I can. Again, apologies for the focus. I'm using my phone, so it's just going to grab onto the nearest thing it can see, which is unfortunately my hand. But I will show you the steps as we work through it. The next highlight is with Temple Guard Blue. Now you might think this is looking a little bit bright, and that's because I unfortunately didn't film this. I forgot to press record because I'm human. But I did just use quite a bit of Temple Guard Blue and really worked it into those recesses to get the nice blue that you see in this picture prior to the brush hitting it. So to carry on the highlighting, I'm going to Baharroth Blue. And one of the things I really like about this technique and the stippling is you really get that nice build-up, and it looks like there's genuinely bits of energy floating around inside this plasma. So I'm really happy with the effect. To do the final highlight, and I'm working some white into that Baharroth Blue, so this will give me a very, very bright blue. And I'm focusing this just on the edges of those coils. Again, exactly the same technique with the brush. I'm kind of stippling it along those edges, using the damping pad if I need to help the paint release from the brush. The last step is with almost a pure white. Again, I'm using AK white, a little bit of water to help it leave the brush, and generally I'm going to do this in a traditional dry brush style. So I'm just looking to pull it across the tops there and really get a nice white highlight. I'm not worrying too much about those pipes. In terms of how this looks, it looks really nice and bright, so I'm really happy with that so far. Now, I'm not going to show you taking off the masking because it was really complex and really difficult for me to try and film. I did try, but the footage was horrendous. Artis Opus have very kindly donated a set of Series D dry brushes as a prize for a competition winner. Now, I don't like to make these competitions complex, so all I'm going to say is leave a comment in the description about which one of my video tutorials gave you the most help. I'll then pick one at random. The closing date for this is 9 PM UK time on Wednesday, the 12th of June, 2024. You can find full terms and conditions in the description of this video, so please do leave that comment. To paint the lights, I went for a green effect, and I did this exactly the same way as the rest of it. I just stippled in some warp lighting and then some moot green. I painted the lights white with some AK white paint, and then took some striking scorpion green and painted this over the lens, and that gave me a nice glowing green light. So you get a really good idea of how all that blue looks now that I've taken the masking off, and I'm really chuffed with how it's come out. So far everything we've done has been with the Artis Opus stippling and dry brushing method, and I have to say I'm really quite happy. So let's get these metallics done. First thing I did was paint some of the copper areas using Balthazar gold. Now, I've thinned this a little bit so it's not covering particularly well, but that's fine. We'll just put a second coat on. That'll give us what we need. And really, for this stage, I'm just picking random bits to add some colour. I'm going to paint all of the silver using gunmetal. Now, this is one of the new Army Painter Fanatic colours, which I bought. And this is covering quite nicely as well. So there's quite a lot of silver on here. But again, generally check the box art if you're not 100% sure. I wanted the metallics to be a little bit grungy, a little bit dirty, so I took some strong tone, again from Army Painter, and just painted this all over the silver and all over the bronze. The observant amongst you will also notice I put a transfer on there, and this is just to add a little bit of detail. I didn't realise that the gold was quite as bright as it was. It doesn't look like that on the transfer paper, so it probably doesn't work so well on the white background, but it's okay for now. I took some really thin Canoptek alloy and used this to highlight the brass areas. Now, I didn't go too overboard with this, but I did just build it up to get a nice solid layer. Again, this is just following the box art. For the steps and any sort of silver bits that I felt I could reach, I just dry brushed some chrome from Vallejo Model Air. And again, I didn't go too wild with this. I just did it in traditional dry brushing and a little bit of stippling as well, just to add some demarcation and add some interest to it. So there we have it. This Generatorium is done, and I'm actually really happy with how it's come out. It's not perfect, I know. I've learned some things in terms of how you apply the paint, but generally for the amount of time it took and the visual effect you get, this is going to look great on the tabletop, so I'm really happy with it. A huge thanks to Artis Opus for the giveaway. Please do leave a comment down below, and I will pick one at random to win the prize. A huge thank you to all my patrons, and if you're interested to see how I painted some of the League of Votann models from the Kill Team Termination, you can check out this video here. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.